Americans first encountering Indonesians will benefit greatly if we can appreciate some of the fundamental differences in how we think about and value a number of core ideas. The concept of privacy, as we know it, for example, has very little meaning in the Indonesian context. Javanese, in particular, don't like to be alone. Now, for an Indonesian to describe a gathering as a ramai, which in translation means crowded, they would be saying that they feel good about the party, that it's friendly and relaxed and happy. Now, for an American to make the same remark would probably mean that we felt there were too many people. At a certain point, to most Americans, a gathering becomes a crowd. Now, it's just about at this point that a gathering becomes comfortable for most of your Indonesian colleagues. In another example, a good Indonesian host never leaves a house guest alone. So if you stay with an Indonesian family, as many Americans are invited to do, and you want to go shopping or go out for a walk, somebody is going to insist on going with you. The fact that there are times when you might actually like to be alone will never cross the mind of your Indonesian host, unless, of course, they have some in-depth experience with Americans and this aspect of their extremely unusual behavior. Americans who stay in Indonesia for a longer term may have difficulty at first in adjusting to what is, from an American perspective, a lack of privacy. Having a house full of servants, for instance, might sound like heaven, but you also have to accept their presence when you may least expect it or want it. Along these lines, the strong cultural tendency for Indonesians to act as a full-service host can work very much to the advantage of an American who takes the time and trouble to get themselves well introduced prior to their arrival. This is because once a high Indonesian official or a highly placed business executive or owner considers you important enough to take on the role of being your host, all kinds of doors can open for you that otherwise would not only be shut, but invisible.
Once you begin to meet people, once names are suggested, let's say you go to a key government office, somebody who's involved in trade promotion, you talk to somebody over there, they give you the names of 3 or 4 people who they think it might be quite helpful for you to talk to. It's always so helpful to ask them, is there somebody from here who could take me over there? Going by yourself to a different office is nowhere near the same as having somebody go with you who understands what you're about and gives a kind of a stamp of credibility to the fact that you came from this office, you were referred over, they take you, they hold your hand, they open the doors, and it leaves you less like a stranger and more like somebody who really is credible, who has the authority of the last office, let's say. The authority of the last office makes a big difference and a big impact.
Attitudes toward what each of us in America call the truth is another area where Americans and Indonesians frequently misunderstand each other. In Indonesia, for the most part, a greater value is placed on being agreeable than on being candid. It's generally agreed that there's no particular virtue in telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth, especially if it requires conveying bad news. Indonesians will normally go to great lengths to avoid getting involved in an unpleasant or a contentious situation. What does this mean for you as an American business person? To use a simple but commonly troublesome example, it means that if you're making a proposal and your Indonesian counterpart is nodding and smiling and saying yes, you may very well not have agreement but agreeable. He may not agree with your ideas at all. Or worse, he may very well know that they're going to fail. But you'll never know this unless you learn to communicate effectively with a people who place a higher priority on being agreeable, especially with people they like and respect, than on being what we Americans value as direct or honest. So how on earth do you find out what your Indonesian associates or colleagues really think? There are a lot of small signals to watch for, while ignoring as much as possible the general agreeableness. Watch, for instance, if they fail to follow up on your train of thought when given the opportunity. They may make some small suggestion or qualifying statement, which, if you examine it carefully, is trying to steer your idea in another direction. Or he may make the equivalent of the obstetrician's ugly baby comment. My goodness, that certainly is a baby. When there really is agreement, your Indonesian associates' cooperation will be readily obvious as they get involved intellectually and emotionally with your plan or proposal. And at that point will adopt a relatively aggressive advocacy of it in their conversation with you, affirming rather than just agreeing, adopting the proposal rather than just admiring it. To the Indonesian, it's clear that man does not and cannot control the universe. At best, man can only know what is appropriate behavior in the face of uncertainty and the unknown. The ultimate way of knowing is very personal, through feeling or intuition as far as the Indonesian is concerned. The person who's developed these capabilities to their highest state is seen by Indonesians as refined and restrained, a personality attribute they call halus. Now, the antithesis of this kind of personality is a person who is seen as rough or coarse, who is called kasar. Reason and rational judgment have their place, of course. Indonesians are among the world's most talented engineers, software programmers, and industrial designers. But among Indonesians, there's no embarrassment at all if some things can't be explained by rational. Most discussions and decisions which take place in business and professional environments in Indonesia are perfectly rational. But sometimes a discussion will head into what many Americans might consider as extra-rational. Indonesians prefer to judge and evaluate other people by criteria which Americans might consider too personal and too intuitive. And these criteria often involve how the Indonesian feels about the other person's behavior, or even what we might call the vibes, rather than what Americans would consider objective measurements or. This has led to some unfortunate misunderstandings, for example, between American managers trying to apply objective performance standards to an Indonesian workforce which expects to be evaluated by intuitive personal standards by someone who knows and cares for them.
In essence, it is extremely difficult to terminate any relationship in Indonesia. And great care has to go into uncoupling that relationship. The usual U.S. reaction is, well, it's simple. I'll send a letter of termination. That's the end of it. Worst that happens is that we get into court. Well, that isn't the way that that termination is handled. Typically, it's a very delicate, protracted negotiation. And the last place you want to end up in Indonesia is in an Indonesian court trying to defend yourself against a wrongful termination charge by your Indonesian partner or agent. Part of the reason is because likely until that is resolved, you're not going to be able to do anything else in Indonesia. So one of the things that absolutely has to be brought to bear in going into the market, it is critical that you look at upfront, how do I terminate this relationship? Because if you don't have an appropriate mechanism, or if you don't think about that as you're going through the relationship, you clearly will find yourself blocked in trying to get out of it and then get a replacement. And until that's done, you're just not going to be doing business.
Literally translated, bapak and ibu mean father and mother. However, in Indonesia, these terms extend to other relationships far beyond the family. The importance of making the bapak happy is expressed as asal bapak senang, or whatever makes the boss happy. In a business setting, you can generally recognize who the bapak is by how the other Indonesians present treat him. As an American business person meeting with a bapak, there are a few things you should pay attention to. Actively seek subtle ways to show that you respect the bapak or the ibu. Don't grovel, of course, that's not expected. But what is actively looked for by the Indonesians is whether or not you respect the bapak. Because it is through the bapak that the entire organization is going to relate to you, if at all. Maintain an attitude of politeness. The point is to meet, exchange polite phrases, and get a sense of each other. The best advice is to let the bapak take the lead, in conversational tone and in subject, and in all other matters. You are mainly there to meet the bapak and obtain his seal of approval, if you will. So use polite behavior, speak softly, and listen carefully. Avoid showing personal superiority in knowledge or technical skill. Never outshine the bapak or the ibu, and always look for ways to make them look good.
Company, it's a small company or medium, depending on what perspective you use. We're about $60 million company, and we have found that it's very important to have a personal relationship with the people you're meeting. Companies, large companies that have a lot of history and background, a lot of marketing, their products will sell for themselves. But for small and medium companies, it is important to sell yourself and that they need to buy you, because they cannot see all the background that you have, what your company's done, and they may not be aware of your achievements or your products or your positioning in the
The Indonesian desire for consensus decision-making is illustrated by the concept of musyawarah. From the fruit market to the negotiating table, the process of discussion to reach a mutually acceptable agreement is a fact of life in Indonesia. Working with others in a cooperative process of decision-making or consensus agreement is highly valued in Indonesia, in large part because of the personal relationship. Consensus is often a particularly important issue when there are a number of Indonesian organizations involved in a single issue, even when the involvement of some of them may seem minimal. Keep in mind that while many Americans approach the process of generating a consensus with a certain amount of distaste, preferring a more individualistic style of Indonesian decision-making, Indonesians actually enjoy the process of building consensus. This means that in and of itself, consensus building has real value in Indonesia. So an American who learns to participate in the process gains not only more effective decisions in their favor, but an opportunity for new relationships or the reinforcement of existing relationships each time a decision needs to be made. A perantara is a go-between, a facilitator, a guide, a contact person who can help you. As an American doing business in Indonesia, you'll need to establish a go-between within most Indonesian organizations who you want to do business with. A go-between can be extremely helpful in crucial business tasks, especially in the initial stages of business development in Indonesia. For example, he can arrange introductions, provide you with his interpretation of sensitive situations, and carry messages and information that can't be effectively communicated by you in person. These kinds of services are all small, but truly vital keys to operating successfully in Indonesia. Indonesians themselves often take professional facilitators with them when they pay official business calls. And you'll find that the presence of a trusted intermediary will make almost any official meeting far more relaxed and far more productive. In this and many other sensitive situations involving the management of Indonesian business customs, you'll find that the Jakarta offices of the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service of the U.S. Department of Commerce can provide you invaluable advice and assistance.
On the one hand, the Indonesians very desperately want foreign investment, foreign business. Why? Because they want to grow the economy and modernize it. On the other hand, they're very nationalistic and they absolutely want to maintain control of their economy. So what you're going to find is any business opportunity, you're going to be straddling those two parameters. Certainly, if you look at the governing family, it is important that in getting into an opportunity in Indonesia that you somehow get as close to the governing family as you can, and that's a very large and extended family. What it does, though, is it clearly creates the right environment and opportunities are available.
Translated literally, jam karet means rubber time. Now, unlike the Western concept of time, in Indonesia, time is not a commodity to be bought, saved, or wasted, nor is it something to which people think it's wise to become a slave. Time never takes precedence, for instance, over relationships in Indonesia. In the U.S., we only make time during business for business. We would rarely interrupt important business for even a good friend. Our cultural priorities are very different from those in Indonesia, where neither time nor business is ever too pressing to prohibit spending relaxed time with every friend who you meet during the day. Americans use the phrase jam karet, and the Indonesians do too, in a gentle, self-mocking way. It's actually a major joke on the colonial Westerners who invented and imposed the phrase, because with a clear understanding of the meaning behind the behavior which this phrase stereotypes, a major key to success in business in Indonesia becomes available to alert and insightful Americans. Think of the business advantage you can gain from an understanding and a valuing of the Indonesian perspective on the importance of friendships and of nurturing each friendship each time you meet that friend. From one point of view, this can mean a day full of wasted time, and the impatience which accumulated from frustration will ultimately paralyze a person who can't manage this kind of day effectively. From another point of view, however, a business day in Indonesia can mean a full round of pleasant conversations, gentle progress on key elements of business, and the opportunity to learn more about the people on whom your business success will depend. Indonesian culture teaches its members multiple ways to maintain personal and social harmony. The Indonesian aversion to individual assertive and acquisitive behavior is linked to the concept of rukun, which means living in harmony without conflict. Indonesians believe that as a person lives in harmony within their family, so they should conduct themselves harmoniously in business. An even temperament, which is seen as a highly desirable expression of inner rukun, is displayed as a slight, lingering smile, which so many Americans can't understand as they look around during their first few weeks in Indonesia. However, just as the culturally appropriate American expression in most urban business environments is a neutral or even a power expression, most Indonesians go around the business environment displaying their inner harmony by this slight, unintrusive smile. But of greater relevance than the smile itself, think about how this concept of rukun will affect your own personal business efforts in Indonesia. For instance, if you're a person who shows frustration easily, or who believes that people have to be pushed a little bit, you might find yourself violating the important standard of rukun in Indonesia. A simple display of impatience or frustration at the wrong time can affect your business prospects the wrong way without you intending to communicate anything except a desire to get on with business. Sopan, or politeness, is another strong underlying dimension of Indonesian culture, which has to do with maintaining a state of harmony with your superiors. This concept involves the careful use of words and emotions, using proper behavior toward seniors, and proper dress for the occasion. The opposite of sopan is tidak sopan, or impolite behavior. Neither patience nor politeness can be easily faked, nor can their importance be ignored. American business people are often so tightly pressed by a closely scheduled agenda that we may not feel we have the time to relax and focus, both of which, of course, are essential elements for patience and politeness. The only practical solution for most of us is to simply give ourselves plenty of what in the U.S. would be considered extra time in Indonesia, and to focus on displaying a relaxed attitude and good manners as an essential business strategy. Avoiding malu, which is something like shame, but potentially much more permanent and negative, is of the highest priority to all Indonesians, whether they're a relatively simple country person, a factory worker, a Berkeley-educated PhD, or a cabinet minister or official. All people avoid giving or receiving malu, and it's essential for Americans to understand the difference between this concept and the relatively simple American concept of embarrassment or shame. Malu undermines the respectability or the authority of anybody to whom it occurs. With those who witness the shaming, and with all who subsequently hear about it being involved in the shaming themselves. Something as relatively inconsequential to an American as abruptly saying no to another person in response to a simple request might invoke malu upon that person. This concept is deeply embedded in Indonesian belief, history, and mythology. Please don't underestimate the power of what may seem a small matter, small malu, to injure another person, and that this kind of apparently small injury can really seriously threaten your effectiveness with everyone who knows such a person. The risk of causing malu is especially high when there is potentially embarrassing or bad news to be communicated. And this can be anything from a slightly negative performance review to calling attention to an egregious mistake. Americans working and doing business in Indonesia for many years all agree that the most practical solution is to always give bad news of any kind in private, and to strongly consider having it delivered by a trusted, confidential advisor, perhaps even a relative or close friend. In other words, a go-between. If the use of third parties may seem like an elaborate or unnecessary precaution to you, especially when the bad news to be delivered is, in your opinion, either deserved or trivial, remind yourself that as an American you have very few cultural reference points to help you understand the depth of emotion which can be stirred in even the most sophisticated Indonesian by what would probably be, to you, a minor inconvenience or embarrassment. We've now reached the end of the seminar portion of the video. Everyone involved in this production hopes you found it useful and worthwhile. Let's review and briefly emphasize some of the key points we've covered in Part 2. We've emphasized the pervasive role of the family as a model for both social life and business organization. The role of the bapak and ibu, or father and mother, appears again and again in all aspects of Indonesian life. We've examined the Indonesian attitudes toward candor, self-presentation, and the proper exercise of authority. We've also reviewed the differences in American and Indonesian ideas concerning such things as truth and truthfulness. We've looked at the core role played by concepts of harmony, mutual consultation, cooperation, and consensus. Finally, we've discussed the uses of a go-between in both personal and professional situations whenever feelings are involved, especially. Borrowing from the TQM idea of continual improvement, why not try to approach the process of doing business in Indonesia as a journey rather than as a battle? If you think of this business opportunity as a personal growth opportunity as well, then you'll be rewarded many times over as you do what it takes to be successful in business in Indonesia.